Hello, bi-monthly, how about bi-whenever? It's a new Whispers of a Dark Future, it's a new year, and that means it's the year of Elon Musk. Alright, so, new year, new being, new hot being body, new resolutions. What was your New Year's revolution?
To read more books, obviously.
Okay. Being's New Year's resolution was to watch Men in Black 3 5 times. I'm 1/5 the way there. So,
Well, you watched it once. That means
4 more to go. That movie
Yeah.
has a tremendous soundtrack. There was a special song, Pitbull.
Mr. Worldwide.
Mr. Worldwide made for I think it's called Back in Time, and it plays at the end credits. So
Isn't it like painfully generic?
Of course. It's Men in Black 3. What do you expect?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe we could have gotten one of the more interesting quote unquote Pitbull songs for it.
No, you're right. They should have got Korn. Korn should have done the soundtrack for Men in Black 3. All right. What are we talking about today?
Well, so you wanted to talk about this sort of thing that's cropped up in far left circles, where it seems people are sort of under the impression that the way to have the alternative to capitalism, or the vehicle of progressive social change, should be some form of communitarian obligation.
Right. Well, let's expand it further. I've seen liberal conservative YouTubers also talk about this. I've seen centrist liberal ones. There is a growing push for doing day-to-day on the ground live activities as like the be-all end-all of program.
Yeah.
For cultivating a more purposeful life. And this is all in response to the worsening effects of siloization on the human psyche from exposure to echo chambers, polarization intermixed with echo chambers, people getting retrofitted into algorithms, the growing disparity of inequality, the cost of everything going up, the destruction of recreational opportunity. Theaters, malls, all sorts of things have gone away. So any avenues for physical meetup have been reduced severely, meaning more people are focusing more and more kind of going more into themselves, and they're only social out. And they're more. I told Piper I didn't have anything to say. She just DM'd me, quote unquote, I don't have anything to say. Thank you. Anyways, so in response to all this, the growing sort of rhetoric has been, how do we go outside? And that's been
how do we touch grass?
Yes. And I don't want to talk, I don't really want to
touching grass question.
And I don't want it to be mistaken. I'm not attacking technology, right? That brass eye meme. Why are people scared of technology? And the guy with the big sign that says technology screams the word technology at a woman, and she freaks out.
I've never seen that, but it's funny.
But there is something to say with how technology is undercut by capital, and how a lot of these social media sites are predatory in all the worst ways possible. Not even just with your media, not even just with your data collecting, but also irresponsible in terms of reducing scams, exposure to extremism. Although I should asterisks behind the complaining about exposure to when this itself is an extremist podcast. So that complaint comes with a bajillion asterisks. But there is something of a loneliness crisis and a wider sort of malaise crisis. Although the wider malaise crisis is ongoing for centuries now. That's due to modernity.
Is
the
malaise
particular intensification
sauce that Javier Malay makes. Malays.
How am I supposed to actually pronounce the word?
No, you're no, that's the correct pronunciation.
Oh, okay.
I was just making the joke because
sandwich.
Malays, haha.
Yeah, yeah. It's like when you make the modernity sandwich, you put the Malays sauce in it and you eat
That
it.
is
And you
the
go,
worst modernity sandwich ever.
You go, I feel empty inside. It's the opposite of what a sandwich is supposed to do. Yeah. Like you were feeling better before, and then after you're like depressed.
That's sad, fam.
Yeah, business being will start giving out. You know those food trucks?
Yeah.
They'll just be like modernity sandwich food trucks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I mean we also see, I mean, part of this is also the sort of re-enchantment with nationalism. People are sort of rediscovering nationalism. There's a channel that is friends with I don't know if I say these channel names if I'm cursing everybody to like 1,000 years of bad luck or something, but I think the person's name is Theory Chud or something.
That's terrible. That's cringe. That is the definition.
It's all terrible. You know.
Well, look, there are levels of cringe. Okay, it comes in gradations.
It comes in grenades.
Yeah,
I'll try to remember this person's name. J. Reich and this person do Horseshoe Theory podcast, and it's the most cursed thing ever.
That is pretty cursed.
It is just Art Chad. That's what they're called. Okay, so Art Chad put out this video, and they're Canadian. They were like, Canadian nationalism is good, and community is good. And J. Reich, who people say, I don't know what he believes, also doing the same thing about, community is good. The common person, the general, the common man must be realized against those elites. We don't know what he believes. It's being suspicion that J. Reg, Art Chad, Shoe on Head, let's really curse this entire podcast with thousands of years of misfortune. Bing wants to put out there the idea that the death of BreadTube was a good thing. Everyone agrees. But
yes,
it left a vacuum. And in the vacuum, I'm going to coin a faction within the vacuum called KingTube, a reference to Huey Long, who his nickname was Kingfish, because as far as Bing can see, okay, people must understand, it takes a special kind of weirdo to be a left-wing populist, just as it takes a special kind of weirdo to be a right-wing populist.
Yeah.
Left-wing populists are interesting because they will typically engage in social austerity, so heavy social discipline. Jordan Peterson, but he hates those darn 1%ers, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, a number of left-wing parties are against gay people, so typically on the Wikipedia will list social conservatism in the ideology section, which the term social conservatism is its own issue. But anyways, if you look at people like Shoe on Head, Art Chad, J-Reg, they're all weird, and their kind of horror show they represent is left populism. In fact, I think I don't agree with people that say, Shoe on Head is an Ozbol or something outrageous. No, I mean, she is a pretty standard left populist. That makes her taxonomically far left in Being's opinion, which I know people will. Well, nobody's watching this, so no one will be mad. I'm kidding. 10 people watch this regularly.
That's true.
So almost a dozen. J-Reg, I can only make guesses because he will never just outright say what he believes, more or less. But anyway, so the rise of KingTube has been interesting. There's also another YouTuber by the name of PF Jung, who is another person to curse everybody with 1,000 years of misfortune. This is a self-described post-liberal, but if you ever ask him what that means, he effectively frames liberalism as like hyper-atomization, hyper-individualism. I think there was a video, typically these people claim liberalism believes in like individual sovereignty and like
I think liberalism is libertarianism, basically.
Yes. And so they use that to argue why community is lacking, right? And so B.F. Young is interesting because by all intents and purposes, he's actually a liberal conservative, a moderate conservative, if you actually pay attention. But he's wielding the term post-liberal in a very, like, confusing way, which still only tells Being that the term is gaining, like, popular usage, because Being was in a Discord going through the toxic waste of political discords, the drudgery. In Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, you have to go through like a river of shit in order to save your loved one.
Yeah.
It's like that. Just all this disgustingness. I was in some VC chat and it was a bunch of self-described post-liberals, illiberals, and the guy was like, I want a like classic Brazilian monarchy system, which was this like constitutional monarch. It was very like mediocre, if anything. And a lot of his views, I was like, oh, okay, so you're just like a liberal conservative. It's like, how am I a liberal conservative? I believe in community. And, all this represents a growing trend that Being likes to call, nobody knows what anything is, and that's it.
Is that really growing, or has it more or less just stayed constant since the beginning of time?
You're probably right. You're probably right. But look, people don't know what fascism is, fine. But hey, nobody knows what liberalism is either. And if Being sees another video on fascism, start with, this word is controversial.
Well, you can't agree on what this word means. All the other political words that we can agree on.
To let everyone know, every political term in political science is hotly debated and controversial. There's not one you're going to find that there isn't some giant field of debates over. But this growing trend of communitarianism is problematic to Being because it's just sort of entrenching people into the logic of territoriality, localism, enforcement of majoritarian democracy. Nothing that really addresses the extra global threats really that the human species faces every day, which is like meteors. But less than that, the growing sea levels and a lot of other complications, another of which is the energy grids having problems, the increased technological complexity causing issues with governments dealing with because they have to constantly outcompete that complexity with their own. Digging ourselves in the dirt into focusing on small patches, I don't think is much of a solution for something that requires a global response. And there's nothing wrong with, like, I want to go hang out with people physically. Of course, that's a need that must be satisfied. But entrenching yourselves in communitarianism actually creates a prison of that, where you're basically saying, I like going out and meeting people, but only in my area. Right. So you're basically enforcing this idea back into people that they shouldn't care about the outside, they should only care about the inside. And I've often critiqued this wider logic as the reverse of Moldbug's patchwork system, where Moldbug envisioned a system with only exit, no participation. Here, these people tend to be reciting the reverse, complete participation, no exit. Right. And I think that comes with a lot of like horrors that I don't think a lot of these people seem to understand, nor do they care. I mean, a lot of these same people, like JREG and RChat, are riling against AI art, and they're obsessed with speciesism blatantly. JREG is one of the reasons why there's now a slur for robots. Although that slur pre-existed in the Star Wars prequel fandom, which just makes it even worse. Somehow everything wrong with society.
You mean the people who like consuming fecal matter? That's the group of people you're talking?
Yes. Everything wrong with society inevitably leads back to George Lucas. So
yeah. Well, I think so. There's communitarianism, you can define it as, okay, the normative thesis that individuals have an obligation to adhere their interests to the interests of the community, right? You have an you're binded by social obligations to cooperation with the particular community that you find yourself in, right? Roughly, you can say that's a definition of communitarianism. And communitarianism is a feature in basically all ideologies except for socialism.
Haha, you forgot about libertarianism.
And when I say that, what I mean is that communitarianism is a feature of liberalism. It's a feature of conservatism. It's a feature of fascism. It's a feature of pretty much every ideology besides socialism, because socialism is the only ideology which says that society should be governed primarily by free associations, right? So institutions should not function to act as limits on people's mobility. Rather, they should function to enhance people's mobility, right? And that reaches its sort of highest expression in anarchism, which on this basis says that it's not even acceptable to try to achieve socialism with centralized coercive political power. You have to destroy that sort of political power immediately and immediately begin building the institutions of free association, right? So socialism is really the only ideology which, consistently repudiates communitarianism. But that hasn't stopped, self-identified socialists or anarchists essentially making these communitarian appeals. So, you'll have people calling themselves anarchists or socialists of some variety who think that, the way that you create an alternative to capitalism or a post-capitalist society is just by ratcheting up communal obligation, right? So basically saying, okay, well, everybody is so obligated to their community that they don't have the right to accumulate wealth and create class stratification. And so if we just, strengthen those communitarian obligations and bonds, then we can start breaking down class divisions and class inequalities, and even breaking down coercive political structures like the state. The problem being that, in fact, this is because of the anti-communitarian nature of socialism. This just isn't socialism. You won't get socialism. I mean, I guess it's conceivable that you'll get something beyond capitalism, but it's not going to be socialism, because socialism requires the free association of the producers, right? And the free association of the producers is not consistent with a communitarian social ethic.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not even consistent with the speciesism stuff either. But that points to another thing where, you have people like One Dime and Theory Underground self-espousing, self-declaring social conservatism and republicanism, which is all part of this, all these people trying to reclaim local space. Bookchin was kind of a trailblazer in this regard, which I think is funny. Right. Where in no uncertain terms, he's sort of become kind of the bedrock, even if just sort of invisibly, to a lot of everything, by extension, Echelon, where now you have a wellspring of renewed, Rousseauian logics. And you have this, at the same time, right, populists also talk about community and affordability. So there's just national Rousseauianism all around, just affecting everything, and it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Bookchin, because Bookchin was very much the sort of touchstone for this idea that socialism or anarchism is about communal obligation. Bookchin started identifying with anarchism after he left Stalinism and Trotskyism and Marxism in general, when he came to the conclusion that since the working class had become sort of subservient to the bureaucratic welfare state and union structures of the post-war, post-Second World War world, that the working class was no longer revolutionary, right? So the working class was no longer going to overthrow capitalism and replace it with socialism. So Bookchin takes up, at least nominally, anarchism,
as an alternative to Marxism, because what he thinks anarchism is about is a rejection of hierarchy and an embrace of communal obligation, right? So anarchism, according to Bookchin, doesn't bother with this idea of the working class as the revolutionary subject. It doesn't bother with this idea that the class struggle should determine the transition from one type of society to the next. Rather, it is a sort of radically consistent conception, obligation to one's community, where, if you establish social hierarchies in which some people have sort of top-down coercive control over others, and there's class divisions, and relationships are regulated by commercial forces rather than communal forces. As a result, if you do that, if you have those kinds of relations, you're actually, breaking down communal obligation and communal ties. So in order to, sort of respect the idea of communal obligation, the practice of communal obligation, you have to get rid of capitalism, get rid of the state, get rid of the market, and essentially organize society around sort of local governance structures which enforce communal obligation, right? And so that's Bookchin's conception of anarchism. And when Bookchin puts forward that notion of what anarchism is, the response that he gets back is inevitably, well, that's not what anarchism is, right? Because anarchism requires free association, right? Anarchism, it's not enough, right, to have a society that's egalitarian and bottom up for anarchism, right? Anarchism requires that the egalitarian and bottom up society is a society primarily organized through free association. You don't get, the foundation of anarchist theory is not that society should be egalitarian and bottom up and maximally participatory. The foundation of anarchist theory is that society should be formed by a series of free associations, and that can only happen if society is in fact egalitarian and bottom up and participatory, right? So essentially, Bookchin's scheme lacks the characteristic feature of anarchism, right? And so Bookchin spends, probably the good portion of his career sort of fighting for his conception of what anarchism is, and against these critiques, which are saying he's missing the point, right? And eventually, it culminates in him realizing, I'm not an anarchist, right? I'm not concerned with the freedom of human individuals to associate and disassociate with different human communities. I'm concerned with the obligations that people have as citizens, as members of communities, to those communities, right? And to the ecology, which is where his idea of social ecology comes in. And so as a result of that, he sort of says, okay, I'm not an anarchist, I'm a communalist, right? But because he passed himself off as an anarchist for so long, that has sort of helped sneak this communitarian stuff into contemporary anarchist and socialist circles through the back door.
And it's interesting to say all this because the backdrop in the world, all this is the fall of Rojava, right? Which was touted as this tremendous communal experiment. And that's currently being destroyed by the Syrian provisional government. Which is bad in the sense that because now the Kurds effectively have nothing to defend themselves with. Although I don't agree with Rojava. I know people are gonna get mad, but it's literally called the Charter of the Social Contract. I don't know what's what.
Yeah,
I don't agree with any governments. Doesn't matter how epically communal they are. But it is the case that the bad thing about it is there isn't much stopping the provisional government from crushing Kurds now, though. That is an issue. Yeah. But I think that just proves that ultimately the path to self-determination, which is going to be an obvious thing what I'm about to say, can only really be fully actualized in anarchism and not through these half steps of trying to form these hyper-localist governments that just get surrounded and suffocated to death.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think there's also something to say about, the rejection of class struggle that I think this often involves. Like, once again, part of the reason Bookchin took up what he thought was anarchism is because he thought anarchism dispensed with the idea of class struggle, right? Because he didn't think that the working class was the revolutionary subject anymore. He wanted the revolutionary subject to be citizens, members of communities, right? Communities themselves, not the working class. And, that's ultimately where this sort of communitarian logic gets you if you sort of follow it out, right? Which is, changing society towards a more ideal state is not a matter of the working class fighting the class struggle. It's a matter of respecting your obligations as an individual to the community and reinforcing communal structures of obligation enforcement, right? Which ultimately is going to end up being the state, right? Because the state is going to be the centralized political authority, which enforces normative ideas of communal obligation, right? And so, then it becomes this, sort of not only a localist, but also inevitably statist, right? And you have the construction of local state structures. For instance, the proto-state structure in Rojava, it had a parliament, and elections, right? Or I'm not sure if it was called a parliament, but it had an electoral process, and different political parties stood for elections, and it was also had
co-presidents.
Yeah,
two presidents. Yeah,
and it was sort of backed by the United States government to displace ISIS. And, and then also parallel with that, Bookchin developed this idea of libertarian municipalism, where specifically the idea was, okay, we're going to take control of local governments, right? We're going to take control of municipal governments, and we're going to transform them into the confederal governance structure of the new communitarian society, right? And so, okay, it lends itself to localism, it lends itself to statism, but it lends itself to those things also in a way that essentially aims to suppress the class struggle, right? Because it says the class struggle is not what's important, right? It's not, what's important is not people's class interests, right? What's important is their communal interests, right? Which are ultimately going to transcend class interests, are going to bind people of different classes together. And there you could almost see a sort of, and the emergence of a sort of like perhaps localist corporatism, where the idea is you have to have these sort of multilateral institutions that bind people of different classes together. But again, this is sort of the opposite of the point of socialism and anarchism, right? If you have a class society, right, that means that there's a ruling class and a subordinate class. If there's a ruling class and a subordinate class, the subordinate class is under the control of the ruling class by definition, right? And expends all of its energy in order to enrich the ruling class, right? And thus, we still live in a world with class struggle, right? We still live in a world in which workers have to go to work in order to earn wages. We still live in a world in which the only way to increase your pay often is to go on strike. We still live in a world in which the only way to get benefits is to threaten industrial action. We still live in a world in which people have to, their lives are governed by the workplace clock, right? Rather than, their own creative self-actualization, right? So, why is it that we want to now adopt this sort of this post-class perspective? In Bookchin's case, it was very badly motivated by this myopic view that, because the working class had been integrated into the bureaucratic structures of the union and the welfare state in the post-war world, okay, now that means that the working class isn't revolutionary anymore. And, really that's just, the way the class struggle goes is that sometimes, okay, the working class is satiated, right? Okay, you give the working class enough benefits and consideration that exploitation for it is tolerable for a period of time, right? But the whole point is that capitalism makes it so that capitalists have to maximize profit, and maximizing profit ultimately means getting rid of the previous concessions to the labor force, right? And so the post-war welfare state is replaced with neoliberalism, and neoliberalism is eventually replaced with something that preserves the austerity of neoliberalism, the privatization, the dismantling of social spending, the crushing of union power, but with something that's entirely more protectionist, right? Where states that are in dire economic conditions are trying to appropriate for themselves as much of a share of the declining world economic pie as possible by implementing all kinds of protectionist measures. And the extremes of that we feel in the United States with the cost of living crisis, in part spurred in major part spurred by Donald Trump's unilateral tariffing. So the idea that the class struggle is something you can transcend or that is irrelevant is just completely untenable. Maybe that's what you want to believe if you're inclined towards, notions that are comfortable but not true. But if you want to deal with reality, you can't ignore the class struggle. And when you start talking about, what's important is community and your obligation to the community, you are no longer talking about the importance of class interests.
Oh yeah, the subject of your program, I think, is going to be fundamental. And the post-war world was all about the overthrow of the worker as the subject. We got to find the new subject. How do we find the new subject? Do we take drugs to find the new subject?
Yeah,
I will say, the worker, the neighbor is a poor choice of the replacement for the worker as the subject. Have you noticed this?
right.
Instead of the worker, it's the neighbor, your communal neighbor, your neighborhood. The girl next door is the subject now.
Yeah,
This is a poor excuse because all we're doing is recreating the foundations for nationalism, and we have let go of greater ambitions. Oh, but the narco-syndicalism isn't relevant anymore. What is relevant is the neighbor. If we must consult with the neighbor, what greater neighbor than the worker, who is the universal neighbor? Not only are they across the street, they're across the whole world.
Right.
And I tell you what,
that was the original point of working class internationalism.
but yeah, I mean, we've got to organize in our neighborhoods. Well, the starting point from which you organize is going to have the boomerang of self-preservation. If you start organizing all these local municipalities, you're organizing to a small polity, and then you're starting to defend this micronate effect.
Right, yeah.
Especially when your subject is the citizen, who is the oldest form of the neighbor, right? We're no longer subjects; we're comrades. We're showing camaraderie,
Right.
And well, you need to sacrifice yourself, your self transformation, for to subordinate yourself to help your fellow man across the street, But ultimately, this doesn't help anybody. It just creates new grid lines for where we can, where you're allowed to move and where you're not allowed to move. And it's all poor. It's all poor. It's. I mean, you could tie this to what's going on in Minnesota, and I think it's starting to ramp up in Maine with the ICE stuff,
right?
Where you have right populism trying to defend the good American neighbors from those dastardly evil Somalian neighbors, which if anyone's ever had like a homeowners association or anything, the interpersonal conflicts that arise are horrifying, and no amount of debating in an assembly will prevent a love triangle from spiraling out into murder inevitably.
Right.
Especially
it's funny. I moved recently, and like one of the first things, the first contact with the people that lived around us was, our neighbor, said hi or whatever. But besides that, one of the first forms of contact we had with our neighbors was a guy from the homeowners association, knocking on the door and saying, tell us about how much he hates the other guy in the homeowners association.
Well, the greatest defense against abusers' crimes of passion is mobility and being able to flee and being able to outmaneuver the social networks that abusers use as the cornerstone to exert their power.
Right.
And if you consolidate, well, we're going to institute proper education and all this moral and ethics within the local community. Okay, but why don't we let people leave and traverse and stop binding them into these little close-knit things? That just creates ample opportunity for people to have certain ambitions to insulate themselves. Also, all of this obsession with all of this, whenever you talk about consensus democracy or general assemblies or face-to-face, you're talking about insulation, right? Where you're effectively arguing for a type of control and rule, and the way you legitimate it is through those processes. So people say, well, we anarchists, we're not against democracy. We're pro face-to-face direct. Yeah, you're talking about intimate insulation to maintain a political order. That's the point. It's to get people comfortable with the exercise so they grow into the ethos of conformity so that there isn't any disruptions. Now, of course, the reason this doesn't work out, the reason there's a lot of issues with centrist liberalism, the liberal democracies today, is because a lot of the population feels like they're disconnected from that insulation, so they're not properly inducted, and so they seek alternatives. But if you notice, a lot of these alternatives is for proper insulation. And not all of these are necessarily liberal. There are centrist liberals who advocate direct democracy. Okay? It's not impossible. Switzerland exists.
Yeah.
And you can engage in a process. The World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, before he was fired for workplace abuse that he conducted, apparently, the rhetoric was, okay, we didn't listen to the people enough. How do we get people to listen to the experts again? Okay, we'll have the experts listen to the people so that the people will listen to the experts. All sorts of ideas, consumer boards, participate in censuses, all sorts of things. And one of the easy outgrowth of that is, okay, we're going to have a consumer assembly. Paracon had all these participatory. You could integrate that where you have directly elected boards or forums, but they're all but the data that's collected from them is transferred to a trustee body to then craft policy out of that's completely permissible.
Yeah.
And I feel so much better. I go outside and I talk to people. I talk to my neighbor. We've done it. We solved the crisis of modernity. And then of course we can ignore the issues such as the constant other that's always arising around us. And what happens when, I don't like the guy from the other neighborhood coming over here.
Yeah.
Which that's the issue you're seeing in Minnesota, where a lot of people are like, I don't want Somali people here because, and then they just say stereotype. These people's exposure to Somalian people is the film Captain Phillips. That's it. Literally just, they're pirates. Of course. Because piracy is not a universal thing.
Yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean, although fantastical and mythologized, was based on the fact that, yes, there were Caribbean pirates. There were Berberi pirates. Everywhere had pirates. And Somali's piracy, although an issue within the community, because Somalian people don't like their pirates. Most people typically don't like their pirates unless it's some benevolent one or whatever. But a lot of the reasons these Somali people leave is because of all this violence. It's because of pirate warlords or
you're telling me a third world country is violent? What?
Yeah. What's interesting?
You're telling me that people resort to violence when they're impoverished? What?
What's interesting because they're like, oh, refugees have such extreme views. Actually, typically, the people who are refugees are the ones who disagree with those extreme views, hence why they're leaving.
Yeah.
So that's because a lot of it, like if you ask a lot of refugees and immigrants, the kind of life they want is pretty underwhelming compared to like the life that bigots think they want.
Right.
You know, like bigots, Muslim immigrants want Sharia law, and then you ask a Muslim immigrant, they're like, I want to start a business or teach. You know, like it's not. Most refugees, most immigrants are pretty like underwhelming about.
I mean, it's
what
funny
government should be.
because I semi-recently watched a report by the German news agency DW on how refugees from, the 2015 migrant crisis, quote unquote, were integrating into German society. And, after showing interviews where, essentially, you're seeing people who came during that time, essentially, getting jobs and mostly being interested in providing for their family. It's explained that that's mostly what they ended up doing. And then, you cut to some white German guy being like, oh, they need to integrate, right? And then all the comments from, all these pissed off European right-wingers is, oh, they need to integrate. Why didn't you ask us Germans for permission to be here? Oh, you need to, nobody wants these refugees. Like, they watched essentially a refutation of their view about these people, right? And it only just made them mad and insist on their nonsense views. I mean, it's just,
I mean, the testament to their ability to integrate, which integration has its own, because assimilation and all that, there's a lot of problematic stuff with that whole concept. But the testament to the fact that immigrants are able to move somewhere and be fine is the fact that you have those stereotypes of people from places like India, Mexico, China, Somalia, who go on social media and pretend to be white and defend white values. You know what I mean? Like, people act as if like the whole weeaboo thing is a phenomena that goes one way. No, there are people all over the world who are major Ameriboos who are tweeting right now about how they hate those darn Somalis, and they're probably Somalian, or they're probably brown themselves from some other country.
Yeah,
white nationalism has left the white people. It's left them quite a while ago.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's also interesting that the thing that's slipping back in because of this focus on degrowth. The degrowth is another part of all this. This social austerity limits and everything. You're seeing the bigotries sneak back in through the back door. Queerphobia. There's polyphobia. I think is that the term for it? What is the term for it?
I guess.
You know what I'm talking about? Bigotry against people who are poly.
Yeah, I guess it would be polyphobia.
Anyways, this concept of well, we don't like those excessive queers. We want uptight, upstanding Jeff who is not threatening to us. We got to bring back the nuclear family. And this is all sneaking in through the back door because a lot of things about queerness don't gel well with this obsession with stagnant locality. Although a lot of things about queerness are exemplified by complexity.
Right, yeah.
So, but it's a terrible time to be alive. That's it. Okay. While everybody's focused on securing their tiny blade of grass, being is focused on abolishing the final border, which is the atmosphere, and freeing the earth from the sun and humans from the earth. And I know that sounds wild and unfavorable to most people, and that's good. I hope it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to pick the subject of your program. You got to pick it wisely. And the worker, the gay frogs, those are far better than the guy across the street who calls the cops on you if you don't cut your grass.
Yeah, I mean, look, you mean we're not gonna like take down capitalism by talking to the trumpeter like 2 houses down?
We're gonna take down capitalism one homeowners association at a time.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's it. We sort of rambled. But any last words?
Fuck the community.
Men in Black 3 on DVD. Pitbull album, whichever one I put on there.
Mr.
And-
Worldwide.
Exactly. A doc. I probably already said that before, whatever. And the last thing I will say is abolish Mother Earth and make the Earth conscious and make it Sister Earth or something. I don't know. Goodbye.
This is important. We're going to be putting up a scorecard, okay? An early vote scorecard, state by state.